All right, we can go ahead and get started. I am pretty excited for this one because this is a cool new feature that will be releasing soonish. We'll talk a little bit about the timeline today. But looking forward to giving you all a little sneak peek of our API. Uh, my name is Varun. I'm part of the developer experience team here at Chromatic. And joining me today are Jarell and Kyle. I'll hand it off to them for their intros. Jarell, you want to go first?
Yeah, I can go first. So I'm Drell. I'm the engineering manager for here at Chromatic for the API team and the capture team. So we're really responsible for like once that data crosses the Chromatic boundary, we're doing a lot of work to capture and expose that data about your storybook and your testing tools to you so that you can use it and build various workflows with it.
Awesome.
And I'm Kyle Gatch. I'm on the developer experience team with Varun. Today, I'm mostly just here to help make sure that your questions get answered.
All right. Before we dive in, just Kyle posted this in the chat, but if you all have questions, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A uh, window. That just makes it easier for us to track them. We'll also monitor the chat in case there's stuff there, but the Q&A window just really makes it easy to track questions, and we'll try to answer as we go along. And if we miss stuff, then we'll dedicate some time at the end for some Q&As. All right, so let's kick this off. Jarell, we have a new public API coming up for Chromatic. Could you tell us a little bit about what it is and why we're building this?
Yeah. So of course we've had like a private API that powers our web application for a while since the inception of Chromatic, and this public API or having a public API has been a long requested feature for some of our power users. It's probably the top most requested feature of anything of all time at Chromatic, having a public API so people can build various workflows. I mean, we've heard of like automating project creation. We've heard want to do some advanced reporting. We've heard like people wanting to like connect this to like Jira and create tickets based off of pinned comments that they make on UI tests. Now we heard a lot of different interesting workflows. And the time became right, like really think about a public API. And I imagine a lot of people are wondering why now versus like then. And so the industry is changing a lot. Agentic development is really changing the way that we think about software. And really like when we think about this in the context of Storybook and Chromatic, there's this development that's happening locally with Storybook, right? Where you're looking at all of your tests, um, getting that quick feedback, making changes based off of that. And then there's really like when you're going into CI, and the out loop, you want to ensure there's no regressions at that point, right? That what chromatic is. You got this local development loop, and then you've got this loop of CI where you're really just trying to make sure there's no regressions, whether that's visual, accessibility, interaction test, right? And so chromatic though, when we talk about like the cloud, our APIs, we have all this data for you, right? Agents are relying on your test to validate their code. And if it's in Storybook and you're running Chromatic, this data makes it into our cloud. We have all that information for you. Yet in this agentic world, we start to ask the question, how do we make that information accessible to agents? Your CI is running the checks and things that you and developer then have to go and review the test. If a test failed today, how does the agent react or act on this test failure, right? We have all this snapshot data, all this diff data, um, accessibility results, interaction test results on every build. What can we do to help speed up that inner loop, which is that local development experience, while you're in Storybook with the data that we have in Chromatic, right? And so that's where, we
Jarell,
start.
can I pause there for a second just
Yeah.
to hit something home? So with uh it's kind of like an important thing you called out that we have all this information when Chromatic runs when you open up a pull request, and Chromatic reports that stuff as status checks on the PRs. But that it's just the agent just knows like, hey, maybe a test failed or it's pending or something, but it doesn't know specifics of why that happened. And that's the data that we're talking about that is not available to the agents.
Exactly, right? Status checks, they know like you may be waiting on X number of tests or you may have a failure. But like why? Like what's the stack? Is there a stack trace you got for me? Is there like something about this snapshot, this image that's not in this status check, that's not in this comment on your pull request? And so this is where the Chromatic API, there's been a lot of changes in the industry. There's skills, CLIs, um, MCP servers that are like really coming to this context of like getting data out of your system and working with it in an agentic workflow. And for us, we really thought about it's like, how do we navigate this shifting landscape with a core primitive that allows us to build out a bunch of other functionality? And a public API is like the key thing that you can then wrap a CLI around. You can build MCP tooling based off of. You can do skills to call it out. And so this API, which has been a long requested feature, we decided to, expose more of our data via this public API so that our customers can enable their agents to query data about bills while they're in progress. They can see accessibility violations that have shown up on these tests. They can use the agent to actually say, in this conversation, this test is fine. This story that you're looking at is fine. Approve those, right? You'll be able to see interaction test results. And like as I noted earlier, this really matters while you're developing and in CI, right? A lot of times I can't count how many times I heard from a developer, I'm waiting on my CI checks to pass or fail. And like there's that context switch that a lot of developers go do to look at something else. And then now you just have this failure waiting. But if you have the agent that can like look at these results in time and has access to these results while you're waiting, it can be fixing a lot of those if it has the right data exposed to it. And so this is very exciting. One of the things that we're very excited about exposing with this public API. And so as we're like looking into it, right, we have decided to use GraphQL. And y'all like wondering like why GraphQL versus like REST? GraphQL can be introspected, right? Introspection can be enabled on these public APIs. Um, there's a lot of every flavor of, when you think about GraphQL, every caller typically wants different data, and being able to give that caller a choice on what data it wants to get back. So GraphQL, those are two of the major reasons that we've been doing it over time and while we're continuing to use it. And this is exposed at on our docs page. That GraphQL schema is going to be introspectable, explore versus just like Apollo Studio reference. And so as we look at this, there's like this mental model that'll show up while working and using the public API. And Varun's gonna do a demo in a bit, but really it's like as a user, I have access to an account or a Chromatic account, Chromatic organization. I have a set of projects that live under that account. And then I'll be able to see builds for those sets of projects and test data for those sets of builds, right? And then we have this cool review test mutation, which is effectively if you're in the UI, you may review a specific test and you're deciding to either accept, deny. We have some new functionality out there that's ignore. Um, and that enable the agent also to take action based off of whatever skills or context you decide to give it. And so as we keep going, like what does this look like today? How do I authenticate against it? We have two flavors, which is really like the standard OAuth 2.0 plus PKCE for human supervised workflows that you want to attribute to a specific user, right? Like I want to know who, like for example, if it's review and test, I want to know who this person that's reviewing the test is typically, right? So that I have that kind of audit trail around my test in these baselines. Who approved this? You know that if you have a user attributed to it. And then there's machine to machine auth, where you may have these workflows like you're running builds in CI, and there's just that CI automation that you want to run through to fix a lot of these issues that may not be doing a review where you want to attribute that to a person, a specific individual. And so we have these two flavors of auth that are going to help in this kind of workflow. One of the things here we definitely with each of these entities I mentioned earlier, you have like your builds, your tests, your projects. There's different scopes. So like a project read scope, a build read scope, project write scope. And so that gives you that'll give our customers and you who all are listening the ability to limit what access you want to give to an agent-based workflow, like a cloud-based headless automation versus like you got a human that's more in the loop, working in that local context. And so in our docs, we have like a little rough prompt. This is an example of the prompt look like if you want to get started with it. And as we start to expose it, this is what we're going to share out so that you can replace where it says replace with your client ID or your client secret and your account, and it'll go generate the details that you need for your agent to start querying the Chromatic API. And so I think this is like a great time. We've been talking, we've been sharing a lot of details about it. Varun, you maybe want to do a demo, show folks what's
Yeah,
going
for
on.
sure. Yeah, I think one thing to point out also is the difference between the two auth flows. The PKCE version, you actually have to go in and sign in into Chromatic and manually authorize to be able to continue using the API. Whereas the other version with the M2M with the ID and secret, that is enough for the agent to work on its own. So you don't actually have to intervene manually to approve the authentication part.
Yeah, that's a good call out, Varun, right? With the way that you would set up a machine to machine client, you would over go ahead and decide on the scopes ahead of time. And as you're manually creating that client, you're making that's the point at which you authenticate that client to say it's going to have these scopes with these ID and secret. But with the OR 2.0 plus PKCE flow, which is really for this like user-based, user attributable flow, it's going to point you, it's going to send you to the Chromatic web app, and you're going to be able to like see what scopes you're giving it at that point in time as you to act as yourself or act as on your behalf. And then you're going to be able to approve or deny that and then go back into the flow with Chromatic.
Awesome. All right, I'm gonna share my screen if you stop sharing, Jarell. Awesome. Um, so first off, I'll just give a quick take a quick look at the Apollo uh, schema for what the API gives you. So this is for the public API. Like Jared said, there's some queries and mutation. There's probably the most sort of useful one is the review test one, where the agent can actually review stuff on your behalf. But generally, you're probably going to be using the review queries where it's stuff like, go find a particular project, maybe look at a particular build for that project, and then on that build, say depending on what you're trying to do, maybe look at uh, the different screenshots that were captured or accessibility data that was captured that is available to you through the sort of more detailed build information. Essentially, you get enough here to introspect and triage existing builds. You can create a new project. You can trigger builds by using your sort of usual CI setup. But once the build is running, this will be able to monitor what the status of the build is and set up like a recurring monitor and respond to what's happening. Okay, so to get started, Jarell shared the little prompt. So there was a lot of issues with Anthropic today and GitHub. So I'm not going to wait around I'm not going to attempt to run some of these prompts live. I pre-baked them so we can kind of go through and see what it looks like. But this is sort of the general idea. I ran the prompt, gave it my specific client ID and stuff. And in this case, I only gave it the client ID in my prompt and the account ID. And then what it does is it kind of goes through, looks at the specific docs text that we pointed to. It correctly identified that no client secret was present, so it's going to authorize with the PKCE flow. And then in this flow, at some point, the chromatic window popped up, and then I have to go and approve stuff. And then what it's going to do is in the prompt, we tell it, hey, like for the account that I shared, can you just show me a few recent builds that were run? So it will go through and in this case, sorry, I asked it to show a list of projects under my account, and it went and sorry, list of accounts under that are attached to my account. So these are the different organizations I'm connected to, for example, and I was able to go ahead and get them. So at this point, the API is set up, and I can ask for specific things. For example, let's go find a build. Uh, for example, this one. I can drop that in and say, hey, tell me what changes were identified by this build. Um, and then behind the scenes, it's going to go query the build data. If there are accessibility changes, it's going to pull the accessibility data. If there are visual changes, it's going to go and pull the visual data. It's going to ask you for a bunch of permissions, especially the first time you run stuff. You can sort of pre-bake them in your project configuration or leave it open where you have to manually accept it every single time. Um, let's try to run this a few times. That's okay. So it's running the introspection on the build, uh, fetching the build data. The build is completed, so that's one of the things that it's noted. That means there's uh, all of the diff data available to it, so it can go and query the actual images that were captured during the build process. And because most of these models are now multimodal, they're able to analyze the images and actually tell you what's happening. I think someone in chat shared that earlier, that for builds that have a ton of changes, they've been using this to go and actually summarize like what exactly changed in the build. And that's the kind of stuff like you can build on top of the API. You can create custom skills that is able to identify stuff like that. And you'll find that very quickly as you're using the API, you end up doing that. You don't want it to write the code to query the API over and over again. So you might sort of start putting some of that stuff into scripts, and we're working on official skills that we'll be able to share eventually to be able to so that you don't have to write the skills yourself. But for the time being, that is a work in progress. Joe, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about skills at this point.
Yeah, so like this is, skills is very interesting to with this approach, right? A great example is like thinking and then looking through here, you have like pending changes. And so in that sense is like what actions do I take from there? Like, because what we're noticing here a lot is there's a lot of schema introspection that's happening each time because it's trying to understand um the GraphQL schema each time, all right? To understand, all right, based off this GraphQL schema, what can I do? Like, how do I find this data? So skills kind of help to enrich, like, all right, you can use these queries to get these sets of information. So that's something that we're going to be thinking about exposing over time. And I'll talk about that a bit more like roadmap wise, like how do we expose skills and MCP tools that help improve a lot of these flows. For example, like there are people out there that use Turbo Snap all the time. It's like question Turbo Snap build. Why? Like, why is it bailing a lot for my repository, or my project? And so being able to have some degree of analysis and using AI to help do that, I think it's something that a lot of people would appreciate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, got a couple questions come in. One of them I think is really relevant to Varun's suggestion to when you find patterns to start writing scripts instead of making the agent basically write a script every time. So the question is like, are the new API operations also going to be executable via the Chromatic CLI?
Yeah, that's a great question. So like on our roadmap, one of the things that we really want to do is start to expose like a CLI helper that calls the API. It helps work through a lot of this thing. I think one of the things that's kind of interesting about CLI as well has always been like a required a build token in a sense or a project token. And so there's really never been like a way to like attribute who's running this build like by person. And so with like the public API auth, something that'll be interesting, like having that auth helper and like really rethinking the way that authentication happens locally. Like you, if someone's running a local chromatic build, you'll be able to attribute that to them. They'll be able to see who ran it. I think another thing that's going to be interesting about having some of these CLI helpers, I think with scripting these and writing the skills, it'll pre-bake a lot of those challenges. They're like, what is the right um, schema to get this data back as well? Um,
Mhm.
so that's going to be exciting too.
Yeah.
And for like specific workflows too, like, if there is an accessibility issue, how do you surface that in the quickest way possible instead of the agent having to like figure that out every single time you run that prompt?
Yeah. The other question is very relevant for what's on the screen here. It says if the changes are being described for a particular build, are the descriptions as terse as what is provided currently by Chromatic's web app, or are they more robust and more descriptive? So could you maybe like, yeah, just walk through the differences of what we're seeing here versus what the web app would show you?
Yeah, so the web app would show you a list of stories that have changes. And what's happening here is it is actually going through and looking at the actual diff images and then telling you what what changed in sort of pixel terms. So in this particular case, if you were coming into this review, this PR, and they don't have a lot of context, this is kind of like the important one. The main sort of piece is that the button color changed, and I just spotted that somewhere. Um, Primary
Yeah.
button color had changed, and that led to a whole bunch of changes, which you can understand. Like if I change the button color, then it's going to change on a bunch of pages and bunch of other components. So it is able to give you a much more sort of humanized version of the diff, like in terms of what UI I'm looking at, or parts of the UI change, which is not something that Chromatic does right now, right? Chromatic will tell you these are the stories and these are the components that have changes, but what's inside those stories that change, that is left for you to evaluate. Were there more questions, Kyle?
Not at the moment. I do want to point out the like scripts are in the scratchpad thing. That looks like maybe a skill that you have running behind the scenes where if an agent creates a script, it does so in a way that you could easily reuse it later.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, so this was sort of like the basic demo just to get it up and running. Let me show another one. So this is kind of like a classic example of perhaps you're working on a task locally, and in this case, my goal was to normalize button spacing onto an 8 pixel scale. So this is our sort of classic mail drop app that we use for most of our demos. And there is sort of spacing that happens between the button and the icon that you see here. Previously, there was like a spacer in there. I got rid of the spacer and just uh, set like a natural margin that is on the 8 pixel scale. So you kind of like you can prompt your way to get to this point, and at this point you might tell it's kind exactly what Gerald said earlier. Like once you push your changes and the CI is running, you don't want to sit there and wait for the CI and see like, hey, did the chromatic build fail? What's in it? Do I need to respond to it? And so on. So a perfect use case of you can tell the agent, hey, monitor chromatic to see if there's any unintentional changes, and if they are, go through and resolve them if possible. So in this particular case, you'll see in the results, it's calling a Chromatic API skill. And what I did was the first time I used Chromatic within this project, I just went ahead and asked Claude, "Hey, you've done a few Chromatic API calls. Can you document everything that all the calls that you've used so far and put them in a script?" And it like went ahead and wrote the script for me. And then the second piece was uh, you are likely writing code to make those API calls. Instead of writing code, can you just write scripts once and then reference those in the skills? So I did that,
Hmm.
and there's a bunch of skills in here for getting the accessibility report for a particular build, querying a build, general API calls. If an interaction test fails, how to triage it. If a visual test fail, or if there's visual changes, how to triage those. So these are the kind of things that you can write them yourself. You can use your agents to write those skills for you, and then eventually we will bake some of this stuff into the CLI or publish our own skills to go along with the API. But this is an example where it ran through and kind of like waited for the build to complete. And then once the build was complete, it usually sets a timer. Like it'll be like, hey, I'll check it in 10 minutes. If the CI is complete, I'll look at the results. And what it did was it found that the changes led to diffs in the button component, which were expected, but it also led to some weird behavior in the header component, where in the header component we wrap some of the content in a div, and that led to awkward spacing. So it just like went ahead and made a fix in the header component and suggested, hey, I have made this particular code change in the header component. I think this will resolve the issue that was introduced. Do you want me to commit and push it? Do you want to take a look at it? Do you want to leave it uncommitted and so on? So that's the kind of stuff that is really cool, where you don't have to sit and wait for the API, the chromatic build to complete and see what happened and respond to it. You can let the agent do that for you and take the first step and actually respond to any issues that it found in there. I'll pause here in case there's any questions about this.
Yeah. I don't see any, but like I think this is just the world of unlocking the public API. I think people are waiting on us to do.
Yes.
Even with like Varun, you don't work on the product necessarily all the time, but like just the world of experimentation, exploration you've been able to do just by having the public API. And I know everybody's like, oh, we've been clamoring for this. We've been wanting this for forever just so we can do what you're doing right now, Varun. So
Yeah.
word of agentic development, that's the not tax is not the word I want to use, but the trends and the shifts that cause business to evaluate. And it's exciting
Absolutely.
for us.
So I'll show one last thing. So far we've been in Claude Code where you're kind of like actively steering stuff. But I have an example here where you might want to use Claude's Cloud Sessions and hand off a task to it. So this is like a pretty pretty common sort of type of task that's self-contained. There might be a linear issue or something that you hand off to an agent where, hey, our buttons right now are black. I want you to change it to use our theme's primary color as the button color. And once it's done, Chromatic is running, like go look at the visual and accessibility changes. If there's something comes up, triage it, address it, and only come to me when the PR is in a state that it's ready to review. So in this particular case, what's going to happen is, let me just start a new task here. So when you set up, in this case, Claude, you can configure a cloud environment. So there's a default environment, a chromatic demo environment. And what you can do is in that environment, you can configure environment variables. So this is where you're likely using M2M auth. So you want the client ID and client secret. You can drop those in as environment variables. And then the other thing is network policy. These are by default, Claude will block a bunch of stuff. So for example, it will block the Chromatic API domain. So in here, you can put stuff like chromatic.com and www.chromatic.com so that when the API calls are being made, then it has access to that. And again, because this repository has the skills that I put in for making those API calls, it kind of knows how to make those calls automatically. So I ran this prompt, and what I'll do is I'll actually show you what it looks like on GitHub. So ignore the first view, which we're just setting up the demo, but the first commit it made was to actually set up and use the brand colors for a green button. And then you'll notice that there's a second commit here to fix contrast regressions because of setting that green color as the background color of the button. And this is where it made the code changes appropriately first time, ran Chromatic, looked at the build results and noticed that there was an accessibility issue, pushed fixes to that accessibility issue, ran another build, watched for it, and then uh, realized that everything is kind of looking good and just approved all the changes. So I'll show you what that looks like in chat. So uh, went through, did a bunch of stuff, updated the team, created the PR, and then it's like, hey, yeah, Chromatic is running a build. I'm going to watch it. When the build completed, it got this information that there is an accessibility violation, and it just went ahead and made the choice like, hey, like you have light text on light background. That's why it's failing. So I'm just going to switch to dark text on light background, which is an existing pattern in the repository, and make that change. You're kind of trusting the agent a little bit here with design choices, but say fine, then you can always undo that. And then again, it sort of was like, okay, the next build is running. I'm going to watch that. Watched it. Everything passed, and at that point, um, it it used like visual inference to be like the changes that are triggered from this are exactly what I would expect. You change the button, and that's the only change that I'm seeing in all the stories. So it just went ahead and used the review test mutation and accepted all of the stories, which is kind of cool. So if you are running the loops that everyone is super excited about right now, this is the kind of stuff where you can trust and you trust your agent and you trust your sort of validation system. You have the ability to now just like let your agent run wild and do UI changes within appropriate guardrails. But yeah, that is definitely possible now.
Yeah. You
Yeah,
got
I
any
think
questions? Go
a
ahead.
similar sort of workflow you could imagine is either have it automatically trigger or maybe you trigger it with like a slash command in your GitHub where if there's like accessibility issues that were found, you just say like slash alley fix or something, and that like kicks off an agent that does all of this regardless of what the initial prompt was, for example. Yeah, this
Yeah,
like we
absolutely.
call them away from keyboard flows. Like they really unlock some pretty incredible abilities.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. I think there's one question here. So from David, you said you're kind of trusting the agent with design changes, but you can always undo that. And you may have already covered this, but is the fact that the agent made UI changes highlighted in any way? Yeah, I mean, it is highlighted by the chromatic test that ran. So in the pull request, Chromatic will tell you that it resulted in a certain set of visual changes, and the agent accepted it. So you're not letting the agent just merge the PR here. You're still kind of the final person to review the code, but you're letting the agent kind of complete a thought where it's not, hitting an issue, then coming to you, then hitting another issue, and then coming to you. You wanted to just kind of like just get to the final point, and then I'll decide whether this is an acceptable path you went down or not. And if not, then I'll kind of correct you. And in most cases, it probably is making the right choice, and and that way, it it saves you the context switching to go back and forth between working on something else, reviewing what the agent does, working on something else. So cool. Jarell, I'll hand it back to you to talk a little bit about the roadmap and how people can get access to this.
Yeah, it's a great question. So that's what everybody's been waiting for. Like, what else do y'all have planned with this thing? And so, but for note, everybody's probably like, this is gonna cost me anything extra? No. It's like normal usage of Chromatic, just in a different, on a different surface. We will have rate limits for API usage. And so as you get access to it in the doc, you'll be able to see some details on what those rate limits look like and how to manage it with some best practices, some guidances around that. Um, what's also really exciting is we're a couple things we're doing. One, um, throughout this the rest of the year, we're going to be looking to add client management to the UI so that you can add your own OAuth client from there and you can revoke it as well. Um, we are looking at exposing some of this API data via MCP, so it has some more nuanced tools to help with these kinds of things, as well as plugins that you have There'll be a Chromatic plugin at some point within your Codex or your Claude marketplace where you can have that one-click install, and then it'll prompt launch you into. Once you like do the MCP Connect, you'll launch you right to into the authentication flow and whatnot. And so once again, accessing this is ultimately will be like a request to us via one of your customer success reps or our support at chromatic.com team. When we're ready to go out there, there'll be an announcement so you all hear about when these features will come out via our DX team, Varun explicitly. And it's going to be exciting, I think, to hear more about what people are doing with this. Would love to hear more about your workflows and your skills and your different things that you're doing. So feel free to shout those out and share those with us. One of the things we're going to have a deprecation policy that's going to be documented about like when we'll deprecate and remove fields. Um, and so that'll give you as a customer a degree of confidence around how we're supporting this thing and notifying you when we're removing this field so that you can adjust any of your workflows appropriately to support these changes and support the API moving forward. But we're going to continue to add more data to this so that you can do more interesting things, answer more interesting questions that we may not explicitly get to all the time within the web application, but you'll have that data on your side.
So we'll send out an email tomorrow with the recording, and in that we'll include a link to a sign up form. So if you're interested in trying out the API right now, you can submit a request through that. We will open up an official sort of early access program somewhere in the near future. But right now we're still sort of working through a few things to the API. So the actual API itself will be it's a little bit more on the unstable side. But if you're still sort of curious to try it out, you can reply. So you can submit that form, and we'll follow up with you.
Yeah. And I think like to add more color to that notion state, like we are committing towards keeping once when we make that launch, the keeping the schema stable so that these fields that you're starting to build workflows on, they'll be stable until like when we decide to remove it, it'll follow our policy. So you have a prompt amount of time ahead to like adjust if we do decide to change something or make a change. It won't be like we're going to change it from right up under you. So that's something that we want to make sure that we're supporting you all and make sure you're able to build these workflows and have the sense of stability and consistency in them. Um, and there was one more thing I wanted to mention there, is this, if you have any insights of things that you want to do that'd be cool to do, we'd love to hear from you. And so like send them out like I want to do this kind of analysis or for your usage or like accessibility. We'd love to learn more about some workflows that you all are building out with this wallet when they come out, as it comes out and rolls out.
Yeah, kind of on that note, Varun, can you share your skill again with all the scripts in it?
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to go through that list just a little more slowly because I feel like it does a really good job of illustrating the types of things that are possible with this API. So
Yeah,
if it's not super
absolutely.
annoying for you, can you like walk through what every single one of those scripts is doing?
For sure. So there is a sort of general Chromatic API script. This is to just give an overview of like what the API URL is, how to authenticate with it, how to access the schema, and so on. There's a introspect skill, which is kind of like a routing skill, whether there are visual changes, accessibility changes, and so on. And then based on that, it will call other scripts to figure out what to do. Um, the visual triage one is fairly straightforward. Like give it like for this project, this build, get all the stories and tell me like pull the baseline image, pull the diff image, pull the new snapshot image, look at them and tell me what actually changed. So that the script is kind of like doing that. It's making the GraphQL calls to get that information and then uh, pass that information to the agent to run their analysis. For accessibility, a similar idea. like go and look at all the stories or a specific story and get the accessibility diff data. So the actual report that is generated by Axe, like get that, tell me what is a new violation, what is an existing violation. If something got fixed, what was fixed? Was it the thing that I was addressing or something else? Um, and then there's even a contrast
So I
checking.
want to highlight that one real quick.
Yeah.
So that's nice. So today you can just have it run accessibility checks on what it's actually working on and it'll fix it. What this enables is looking across all the accessibility issues of a code base and like
Not
triaging them
yet.
and oh, not yet.
Not
Okay.
yet. Yes. So that is something that is coming to the API soon. So what
Oh,
Kyle is
okay.
talking about is the accessibility dashboard, where you can go and see, hey, what are all the accessibility issues in this project? So that is going to be part of the API soon. It's not yet. This particular scale is pulling for a specific build. So you can see there's
Ah,
a build number that you need to pass into this. But yeah, the thing you're
I
talking about
see.
is
Yeah.
coming soon.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah, that's a really powerful workflow too that we've been talking about. Is like a lot of there's this other like running trend in the industry. Like we've talked about agentic workflows, but about like the different accessibility legislation that's coming out. And like there's only so much you can test in an automated way versus the manual way. But like with this automated context, is like, being able to see that list. And if you have like a set of guidance around resolving these, like giving context to the agent on how to do those and how you would like to resolve these. And then now you have this list and you can set up this loop that goes through and resolves a set of them and chunks them out via PR. So that's something that's like really cool. I think that will be interesting to folks as they embrace this world of agentic development, but also like there's this other thread out here like around accessibility legislation to continue to resolve issues continually that may arise in the product.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's one like last one I'll share is the contrast one. This is something that Asian came up with its by itself, where in the example that I shared here, where you change the background color of the button to green, one of the things that happens is it realizes, hey, there's a accessibility issue where I need to pick a different color. So it just added the scale to be like, when I run into this scenario and I pick a different color, I need a quick way to figure out whether this color pair has high enough contrast or not. So the script does that. If you're running locally, you'll have access to Storybook MCP and you can just trigger another test run and get that information. In the cloud, right now, you don't have that. So this is kind of like a nice hack where it doesn't have to like run the story in the browser to go and see if the contrast is correct or not. It can just quickly evaluate what color pairs from your tokens will match high enough contrast and then use that instead. Kyle, did that cover everything you wanted to see?
Yeah, I saw lots of possibilities listed there. So I thought it would be a good illustration of like the types of things that you can do with this today. And it sounds like even more is coming as we continue to build this out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's one more question here from Kalig. With these new features, chromatic usage could grow exponentially. How can customers avoid a surprise bill? That's a great question,
Yeah,
Kalig.
I
So
got
we got some stuff in the works for that. One thing I would recommend is making sure that TurboSnap is properly configured in your project, so that you're not getting charged for stories that actually don't have any changes associated with that. But we're also looking at other optimizations that help you. Like for example, we have a new trends dashboard available to you in your under your sort of billing section of your account, where you can go and evaluate. Is you can actually look at the graphs and stuff and see is the is is the usage kind of in line with just people using Chromatic more naturally, or is there a sudden spike that was caused by turning on a new feature, or the agents are suddenly running much more builds than necessary, or you are using TurboSnap, but it's not running as efficiently as possible. So it helps you sort of understand that information and diagnose that and optimize stuff. Gerald, anything else you would add to that?
Yeah, we're also evaluating some of our usage alerts that are in the product. We're working on some things to, as you're going up, as you're going from usage, like to notify you. We're adding some kind of like cost projection, looking at some cost billing projection mechanisms into the billing page that would help you be able to see like, all right, I'm here with my usage. This is what I'm trending towards ahead of time. Because obviously, like that's one of the things with any usage-based product that's a developer tool in the AI age, you probably expect if you're using more AI, you expect this to trend upwards. And then, like we're talking like token usage. Um, a lot of that is with that's why we think about the MCP and skills to optimize a lot of that output that you're getting back from Chromatic and how that loads into your context window in your agent. So there's a lot of things that we're thinking about, like to keep help engineering teams, engineering organizations keep their spend within a moderate amount that grows with their organization.
Yeah.
Couple
Terrell, it
more
looks like,
things
oh,
also in the works that we'll be announcing like fairly soon in the next couple of weeks. So I won't spoil it right now, but keep an eye on our blog and the notifications within the app. We'll announce those shortly.
interesting. I think those were the things that I was about to ask Terrell to talk about. In lieu
Yeah.
of that, could you maybe just explain what TurboSnap is a little bit? It sounds like
Yeah.
we've got some folks that
I
aren't
can I
actually
can
aware.
talk about Turbo Snap, then I can maybe I allude slightly to a bit of it.
Maybe how agents have changed our understanding of the value of TurboSnap. That would be a good conversation.
Yeah, that's a great question. So Turbo Snap, one of the things that we like think about what Turbo Snap is, right? There is a from build to build, we're doing baseline tracking, right? And like your typical visual regression testing tool is like snapshotting all of your um test in a sense across every change that you make, right? And so it's alongside that you're tracking some degree of a history of your baselines for a customer. With TurboSnap, it was our one of our like thoughts and perspectives around how do we help customers like as they grow in usage, they don't stop running Chromatic, who's safeguarding, who's kind of that buddy that's looking over your shoulder, helping you to catch things. Because unless you run it, in intention, like unless you're going to catch things, there's some aggression, some things that'll slip through the gaps. And so we want to help our customers continue to keep it running, but also not absorb so much of this cost, usage-based cost from running it. And so TurboSnap, what it does effectively is like looks at your dependency graph, like based off the changes that you made, like the commits that you've made in your changes, and says, all right, based off this commit and these things that change with this commit, look through the dependency graph to see like what things I should actually, Chromatic should actually take a capture of in a sense, and present to the user. So it's like this, it helps with this visual filtering, but also with this nuance of like reducing the capacity at which one needs to actually capture the entire storybook in a sense, right? Like we can, in a sense, speed up your builds. So you save on CI time cost, you save on chromatic cost, because you're not running your entire storybook. So we reduce that cost on that snapshot
Yeah.
from that
So
perspective.
just to make that concrete, if you imagine you're working on a specific page and in one commit you change like one part that's only on that page and that's it. And so Chromatic isn't going to test your whole storybook, which is what it would do without TurboSnap. It'll instead know that that's the component that changed, and it'll only test that one page.
Right.
But then the next commit, let's say you change something in the header, and that affects, I don't know, all your pages, 5 of them. Now Chromatic is going to know that dependency graph as well. And so it's going to check not just the page you happen to be working within in your storybook locally, but it'll know, oh, that header is reused across all these components.
Yes,
I need to go test all
exactly.
of those too.
Right.
But it's
Exactly.
not going to arbitrarily test your date picker and your
Mhm.
whatever else is in your storybook.
Right.
It's
Right.
only going to do what actually matters, basically.
And
Exactly. So like,
it's using like actual dependency graph that is generated by your builder. So if you're using
Sure.
Leet or RSPack or Webpack, those tools will generate that information, and that's what Chromatic is relying on. So it's not trying to guess at it; it's actually
Mhm.
using built information.
Right. And so
Yep.
in this nuance, this journey, right, we built TurboTax to be very conservative in a sense where like because we want to catch those regressions if you're having them. Like we want we don't want to like miss something intentional because you're relying on us as a trust factor to help you see these things. But in that is like in some ways it might be too conservative when you talk like package JSONs or package lock files that change and you're trying to figure out like this one dependency does it really map to all these stores. We bail sometimes a bit more conservatively than we desire to right now. And then there's this nuance of like, if you're in a monorepo, like there's some organizations that have huge monorepos and their back ends and their front ends are all together. But if a back end change is happening and their setup has TurboSnap running, like they're like, hey, like I don't have any changes here. Like, and I got some usage for Chromatic. Could you automate that for me so that these aren't really charged against my quota? And so we have some things in the work to think about those kinds of problems and help alleviate that. I think there's some challenges with merge commits in this world, right? As we're trying to be conservative, and so we're looking at resolving those long term and seeing how we can help optimize that usage in this world of agentic development. And like a bail means we effectively test all of the stores because we're not quite sure what's been affected. I've been saying bail. I didn't think I explained it.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
That's funny. I just did it in the chat.
Cool.
Yeah, so
Awesome.
agents have kind of changed our thinking around that a little bit. And what I believe Varun is alluding to is that we've been iterating on TurboSnap and how it works, specifically to address how much usage agents are causing and the different calculus involved there.
Yeah, right now, like Joel talked about it, that there are times when uh, Chromatic will be fairly conservative and recapture every single story. Because let's say if you change a global CSS file or something in package.json, but we are looking at improving TurboSnap more to adding sort of different modalities there so that we can be a little bit more aggressive when it comes to skipping builds that are unnecessary. So yeah, I think that we'll kind of announce it as we get closer to those releases, but something that we're definitely working on.
Yeah. Any final questions? Just about at time.
All right. Awesome. In that case, thank you, Jarell and Kyle, for joining today. This was awesome. I'm excited to get this in hands of you all and see what kind of stuff you build with the API. Like I said, we'll send out a follow-up email tomorrow with a sign-up form. So if you're interested, you can reach out and let us know, and we'll start rolling out access shortly. Well, thank you all.
Thanks for
See
joining,
you.
everybody. Take care.